Under the pale fire of a dying sunset, the desert stretched endless and lonely. The wind whispered through the dry brush, carrying the faint scent of smoke and secrets long buried beneath the sand. The world felt heavy that evening, like the land itself was holding its breath. Somewhere between the ridges of red rock and the shadows of a burning sky, a wounded Apache warrior stumbled out of the wilderness, clutching his side, bleeding from a battle he should not have survived. His eyes were sharp with defiance, but they carried the quiet ache of someone who had seen too much. Down the dirt trail, a wagon creaked under the fading light. The woman driving it looked lost, though she wouldn't admit it even to herself. Her dress, once white, was streaked with dust and the dull stain of fear. She had been on the road since morning, running from a life she could no longer bear, chasing a promise she didn't understand. The land was cruel, and the night colder than she expected. When her horse limped to a stop near a stream, she climbed down, trembling, her heart pounding in her chest. That's when she heard him. The sound came soft at first, had grown low and ragged. Then she saw him, half hidden among the rocks, his body broken, his skin marked with the harsh traces of war. For a moment, she thought he might be dead. But when she knelt beside him, his eyes opened, burning with a wild light that sent a shiver through her spine. He didn't speak her language, not fully, but desperation has its own tongue. His lips moved, struggling for breath, and then came the words that would change both their lives. "Can you pretend to be my wife tonight?" The words hung in the air like smoke over a dying fire. She didn't understand what kind of madness had driven him to say that. Maybe it was fever, maybe fear. But there was something in his gaze's silent plea, a truth behind the lie. The night was closing fast, and she could see torches flickering in the distance. Riders, men searching, the kind of men who wouldn't stop until they spilled more blood. The warrior's breathing quickened as the wind shifted, and his voice dropped lower, rough but certain. "They'll kill me if they find me alone," he whispered. "They'll believe. If you stand beside me." She looked at him, torn between terror and something she couldn't name. He was a stranger, a danger, an Apache outlaw. And yet she saw no threat in his eyes, only exhaustion, pain, and the fragile hope of survival. Her hands trembled as she reached for the blanket in her wagon and threw it over him. "I'll help you," she said softly, her words barely a breath. "But just for tonight." He nodded once, his face unreadable, though his eyes lingered on her as if memorizing her face against the dusk. He didn't know her story, that she had left everything behind in search of peace that never came. She didn't know his, that he had fought for land, for honor, for a people whose voices the wind carried away. Two worlds that were never meant to meet had collided in the dust of a dying day, bound by a lie that already felt too real. As the sound of horses drew nearer, she stood beside him, heart hammering, pretending to be something she wasn't. The riders appeared from the dark, men in rough coats, rifles slung across their backs, suspicion carved deep into their faces. They looked from her to him, and she could feel the weight of their eyes pressing down on her. One of them spat on the ground. "What's a white woman doing with an Apache?" he growled. Her throat went dry. She opened her mouth, but no sound came. The warrior's hand reached for hers, strong and steady, grounding her fear. "My wife," he said, his accent thick, but his tone certain. "She'll stay with me." The men exchanged dark looks. One laughed bitterly, shaking his head. "That's so? You best pray the world never finds out." Then they turned their horses and rode off into the night, leaving dust and silence behind. When the last hoofbeat faded, she pulled her hand free, stepping back, her pulse still racing. "You lied," she said, though her voice lacked anger. It sounded more like confusion, like she wanted to believe the lie herself. He looked at her for a long moment, then said quietly, "Sometimes a lie saves more than truth ever could." The fire they built that night was small, barely enough to keep the cold away. She sat across from him, watching the flames dance over his face, tracing the scars that spoke of old battles. There was something untamed about him, dangerous, yes, but also deeply human. He watched her too, not like a man looks at a stranger, but like someone trying to remember what trust felt like. "Tomorrow," he said, breaking the silence, "you go. You forget me?" She didn't answer. The night stretched long and heavy. Coyotes called in the distance, and the stars hung sharp over the desert sky. Sleep came slow, haunted by questions she couldn't silence. Who was he really? A fugitive? A warrior? Or something else entirely? At dawn, the world turned gold. The air was cold and pure. She woke to find him gone. The place where he'd lain was empty, except for a single feather left by the fire. She picked it up, holding it between her fingers. The feather was black, streaked with red, like the land itself. She didn't know why, but she tucked it into her dress, as if keeping a promise neither of them had spoken aloud. Days passed. She reached the next town, tried to forget, tried to live again. But his voice followed her through the wind, the way he'd looked at her, the way he'd said the word wife. It wasn't just a lie anymore, it had left something inside her, something restless. Then one evening, as she stood outside the inn, she saw him again. Across the dusty street, his silhouette appeared against the setting sun. He was alive, though changed. His hair was tied back, his face half hidden beneath a band of leather, but his eyes were the same, steady, deep, and burning with a quiet truth. He didn't speak at first, just watched her, like the silence between them carried the weight of everything they hadn't said. Then slowly he walked closer, stopping only a breath away. "You shouldn't have come back," she whispered, though her voice trembled with something other than fear. He smiled faintly, a sad, knowing kind of smile. "Maybe I didn't," he said softly. "Maybe I never left." The night swallowed the rest. And somewhere in that fading light, between truth and lie, between love and survival, the line blurred beyond return. The lie that began as a means to live had already become something deeper, something neither of them could undo, before the next sunrise. The world around them would change forever. The air in the small frontier town was thick with dust and whispers the day he returned. No one spoke his name aloud, but everyone felt his presence like a storm on the horizon. The woman who had once pretended to be his wife stood at the window of the inn, watching him tether his horse near the well. The memory of that night in the desert still haunted her, the sound of the riders, the warmth of his hand, the lie that had saved them both. Yet now, seeing him alive again stirred something she wasn't ready to name. He wasn't supposed to come back. She had built her fragile peace on the belief that he never would. He moved with the same quiet grace that first unsettled her. His hair was longer now, his skin marked by sun and wind. But the look in his eyes was unchanged, sharp, unreadable, carrying stories of war and survival. The townsfolk watched from porches and doorways as he walked through the dust, their suspicions simmering beneath the surface. To them, he was still an outsider, a reminder of bloodshed and the wild beyond their fences. But to her, he was something else entirely, something she didn't yet understand. That evening, as the sun sank behind the hills, she found him standing near the old barn, his silhouette framed in the dim light. For a long moment, neither spoke. The wind carried the scent of rain and dry wood between them. Finally, she broke the silence, her voice low and steady. "You shouldn't be here. People will talk." He looked at her, the corner of his mouth lifting slightly. "Let them," he said. "Truth or lie, they'll talk anyway." She hesitated, her heart uneasy. "Why did you come back?" His answer came slow, measured. "Because a promise doesn't end when the night does." She wanted to tell him that what they had shared wasn't a promise, only a moment of survival, two strangers pretending to be something for the sake of staying alive. But the way he said it made her doubt her own truth. The firelight flickered across his face, revealing the faint scar along his jaw, the kind that comes from living through too many close calls. She could see the weight he carried, and part of her ached to know the story behind it. He turned to face the open plains, his voice quieter now.
Apache.
"My people are scattered. The army hunts us like shadows. I've no home left." Something in those words struck her deeply.
Oh.
She, too, had lost her home, though in a different way. She had fled from a man who promised love but gave only control. Bruises had faded, but the memory never did. That night in the desert had not only saved his life, it had saved hers too. "You can't stay here," she said, trying to sound firm. "The town doesn't take kindly to outsiders, especially not one like you." He glanced at her, his eyes softening. "Then maybe you'll help me again, pretend once more." She almost smiled at the irony. Another lie? He nodded. Sometimes lies keep us breathing. That night, the storm finally broke. Rain fell hard against the roof, the sound echoing through the empty inn. She couldn't sleep. The thought of him alone in the dark, hunted and unwanted, kept her awake. When she finally stepped outside, lightning flashed across the sky, revealing him sitting under the eaves, staring into the rain. He looked up as she approached, and for a moment they simply listened to the thunder. "You're not afraid of storms?" she asked quietly. He shook his head. "The sky only reminds me that nothing stays still." His words lingered in her mind. The way he spoke carried the weight of someone who understood loss too well. She sat beside him, her dress damp at the edges, her heart unguarded. "You speak like a man with no fear." He turned to her. "Fear is not the same as running. You ran once. So did I. Maybe we both stopped." The rain softened into a steady rhythm, and something unspoken passed between them. She didn't know if it was comfort, guilt, or the beginning of something neither of them could control. The candlelight from the window cast their shadows long against the wall, as if fate itself was watching. The next morning, the town awoke uneasy. Word had spread that an Apache had been seen near the edge of the river. Some men gathered with rifles, muttering about justice and danger. She watched from the porch as they rode out, her stomach tight with dread. He stood by the well again, calm, waiting. She wanted to warn him, to tell him to run before they found him, but he only met her gaze and gave a slight nod. "Don't do this," she whispered, stepping closer. "They'll kill you." His hand brushed her shoulder, gentle but firm. "If I run again, I'll never stop. I came back for truth this time." "What truth?" she asked, voice trembling. He looked at her with that same quiet intensity that had once frightened her. "That not all lies are sins. Some become the only way to find what's real." The men arrived soon after. They questioned him, their words sharp, their hands never far from their guns. She stood nearby, every muscle in her body tense. The leader of the group, a man with a gray beard and a cold stare, spat in the dirt. "You've got no place here. Folks remember what your kind did. If you want to live, you ride out now and don't look back." The warrior didn't move. "I'll go," he said simply, "when the truth is done." The words meant little to the men, but they carried something heavier to her. As they rode off, muttering under their breath, she turned to him. "Can't fight them all," she said. "I'm not here to fight," he replied. "I'm here to finish what started that night." Her pulse quickened. "You mean the lie?" He nodded once. "A lie told in fear. But it brought me to you. That makes it worth finishing." She didn't know what to say. Everything about him defied the world she'd known, the lines of right and wrong, love and duty, truth and survival. Yet in his quiet conviction, she found something steady, something real. The days that followed blurred into restless waiting. The town kept its distance. Its whispers grew louder. Some said she was cursed, others said bewitched. But every night, she found herself drawn to the edge of the fields, where he built small fires and watched the stars. One evening, she joined him. The wind was cool, the sky full of silver light. He was carving something from a piece of wood, his movements slow, deliberate. When she sat beside him, he handed it to her without a word. It was a small figure of a bird, wings open, as if caught mid-flight. "It's beautiful," she said softly. He smiled faintly. "It's unfinished, like us." She traced the shape with her fingers, feeling the rough edges. "And if it never gets finished?" He looked toward the horizon. Then it was still worth carving. A shot rang out in the distance, breaking the fragile peace. They both turned sharply. The men from town were riding again, their torches flickering like angry stars in the dark. She froze, fear flooding her chest. He rose calmly, eyes narrowing. "They won't stop," she whispered. "You have to go." He shook his head. "If I leave now, it ends with another lie. I won't live that way anymore." She wanted to stop him, to make him run, but his resolve was stronger than fear. The thunder of hooves drew closer, echoing through the empty fields. The bird carving slipped from her hand and fell into the dirt, half buried. And as the rider's shadows stretched across the land, she realized the lie they once shared had grown into something neither of them could escape, a truth born in fear, but shaped by love. The night swallowed the rest, leaving only the sound of the wind and the promise of what was still to come. The riders did not attack that night. They circled the fields like wolves testing a fence, and then turned back toward the saloon lights, leaving only churned tracks and the echo of their threats. The quiet that followed was heavier than gunfire. At dawn, the town pretended at normal life. The carpenter swung his hammer, the storekeeper opened his ledgers, the blacksmith's anvil rang steady, but every pair of eyes kept slipping to the inn porch where the woman stood, and to the well where the Apache warrior drew water as if he belonged to the morning. The lie they once shared had wandered into daylight, and daylight made it dangerous. By mid-morning, the sheriff sent word to the inn. He was a tall man with a careful walk and a gaze that weighed every answer before it was spoken. He did not reach for his pistol. He did not raise his voice. He asked for a quiet talk in the back room where flour sacks were stacked like small hills. The woman poured black coffee that tasted of burned beans and fear. The warrior stood beside the window, not touching the curtain but near enough to the light to see any hand that moved wrong. "You two started a storm," the sheriff said. "I can't stop the wind, but I can keep the roof from flying off. Truth would help me do it. You say you're married? Papers exist for that. Rings do too. This town loves proof as much as it loves bread." The woman felt her cheeks flush. The warrior answered before she could. "We stood together when death was near. Where I'm from, that is more than a ring." The sheriff studied him. "Where you're from is a long way from here. Out there the army says there are raiders on the move. Out there a ranch was burned last week. Folks count graves and forget to count mercy. I won't have a hanging because people forgot how to breathe. If you stay, stay quiet. If you go, leave soon." He set his cup down and added in a softer voice, "And if there is any hidden truth I ought to know, you tell me before the others force it out of you." After he left, the woman leaned against the wall and listened to the wind push at the shutters. "He is giving us a choice he would rather not give," she said. "He will hold the rope only as long as the town lets him." The warrior watched a hawk glide over the fields. Choice is a word men use when they want you to believe the road is yours. The first subplot rose from the church house on the hill. The preacher's sister kept a ledger of who helped the poor and who only said they would. She brought food to the inn, placed the basket on the table, and looked from the woman to the warrior without judgment, which made her gaze feel heavier than judgment. "The Lord asks for truth," she said, "and also for kindness. Sometimes one is the road to the other." Before she left, she pressed a thin silver band into the woman's palm. "If a circle keeps you safe, use it." Another angle came from the saloon. A gambler with pale hands had once courted the woman's favor when she first arrived in town. More interested in the gold ring she kept hidden than in her heart. He saw the warrior now and tasted an old humiliation. That evening he bought drinks for men who were happy to trade their silence for anger and their patience for noise. They spoke of the burned ranch, of arrows found in fence posts, of cattle driven off into the hills. Every problem found its shape in the face of the man by the well. The gambler promised free whiskey the night the problem was solved. Beyond the town, the desert shaped a different story. A small camp lay hidden in the folds of a red canyon, a fire carefully fed to make little smoke. A boy practiced with a broken bow, a woman ground corn in a stone bowl, an older man sat with his blanket pulled around his shoulders like a fading flag. These were the warriors' people, or what was left of them. Scouts had told them the army march was close, food was short. The old man's voice was thin, but steady when he spoke to the scout who returned from town. "He went back," the scout said. "He stands beside the water where the whites fill their buckets, says he will finish a truth." The old man closed his eyes. "Truth is a blade," he said. "Use it with care, or it cuts your own fingers." The woman in the camp listened with a tight jaw. She was the warrior's cousin, and she had buried a brother last winter, when the snow fell like stones. "Truth or blade," she said, "we need him to bring us food or a path." That need pulled the warrior in two directions. In the quiet of the inn, the woman could see it in his shoulders. He wore strength like a well-made coat, but responsibility sat on him like a pack too heavy for one back. She told him about the life she had left. The man she had fled had not broken bone, but he had chipped away at voice and will until both were thin as glass. "One day I heard my own step on the floor and it sounded like a stranger," she said. "That is when I ran." The warrior listened as if confession were a shared meal. He told her about a sister who used to laugh like the river sounds in spring, and how quiet she had grown since the last raid, and how every quiet child becomes a sign of a winter that lasts beyond snow. The tension tightened at noon when a scout from the fort rode into town with a paper nailed to a board. Rewards fill up a man's imagination faster than sermons do. The notice offered coin for any information leading to the capture of an Apache raider known for slipping past sentries at night. The drawing on the paper was poor, but the set of the jaw looked close enough to spread doubt like wildfire. The sheriff tore the notice down and folded it into his coat, but the crowd had already seen it. A word became a rumor, and the rumor found legs. The woman begged the warrior to hide in the shed behind the livery while she spoke with the sheriff again. The sheriff heard her story and drummed his fingers on the desk. "If I had a paper with dates and a ring to match, I could hold the loud ones under the law," he said. "I'm not asking for a false oath. I'm asking for enough truth to steady the ground." She thought of the silver band in her pocket. She thought of the lie that had once saved them and how it had begun to feel like a seed with roots. She did not answer. The sheriff sighed. "There is a wagon due from the fort tomorrow. Soldiers will ride with it. If they look close at your friend, I can't promise soft hands." Evening brought another threat, smaller but personal. A boy from town, no more than 12, skipped stones at the river and watched the warrior fill a bucket. The boy's father had been one of the riders who circled the fields, and his mouth carried stories like a lantern carries flame. Pa says you burned a ranch," the boy blurted. The warrior paused, then crouched so they were level. "I burned a field once," he said. "The grass grew better the next spring. Fire does more than one thing." The boy studied him and frowned. "Pa says you lie like the wind." The warrior smiled a little. "The wind does not lie. It only moves. Men give it words." The boy's brow loosened, skipped another stone. Later he told his mother that the man by the river spoke like the school reader but with more weather in his voice. From the hill, the preacher's sister watched the town pull itself tight. She gathered women in the church house to bake bread for families in the outer shacks, and she asked the woman from the inn to help. The work gave the woman a sense of steadiness she had not felt since the first night in the desert. Kneading dough under lamplight, she listened to the other women talk about the price of flour and the strange color of the western sky, and the way the new school teacher kept his hat too long indoors. No one spoke the warrior's name. No one had to. He was the stone at the center of every ripple. The gambler worked on a different plan. Near midnight, he met with 2 ranch hands behind the saloon. They were not bad men, only men tired of fear. He told them the reward would feed a family through winter. Said the sheriff had gone soft. He said the army knew how to end trouble. The ranch hands swallowed the drink he gave them and tried to ignore the way his pale smile never reached his eyes. They agreed to ride at dawn and fetch the soldiers to the edge of town where proof could be made. The warrior's own subplot deepened in the Red Canyon. His cousin slipped into town at dusk and found him by the shed. They spoke in low voices shaped by old songs. She told him the camp would not last another week without help. He told her the town had good grain if one knew how to trade for it. "Trade what?" she asked, when every face wears a gun. He looked toward the inn window where a candle burned. "Trade truth," he said. "Trade the promise I made when the night was black and she stood beside me." His cousin's jaw tightened. "You will trade your breath for hers, and then both will be gone." He put his hand over her fist until her fingers eased. "I am not asking you to believe," he said. "I am asking you to wait one more day." That one day became the hinge for everything.
Ow.
In the morning, the fort's wagon would roll through the pass. In the morning, the gambler's men would meet it. In the morning, the sheriff would walk the main street with a steady step that told people where to look and how much breath to take. In the morning, the preacher's sister would bring a basket and a quiet word. In the morning, the boy by the river would ask his father why a man he feared had smiled at him like a teacher. Night fell like a long coat. The woman and the warrior sat near the back door of the inn, with the carved bird between them. The figure was still rough along one wing. She turned it in her hands and felt the unfinished edge. "I could wear the ring," she said slowly. "Not for a lie this time. For a truth we have not learned to name. Maybe the paper could come later." He looked at her in the dim light and did not answer right away. The weight of his silence was not refusal. It was respect. Finally he said, "If you wear it for safety, I will not fight you. If you wear it for more, I will not let the world make it small." Before she could reply, A dog barked. Then another. The sound of hooves slid through the dark like a knife through cloth. She rose and went to the window. Lantern light bobbed beyond the livery, moving in a slow line toward the back alley. The warrior stood, every muscle quiet, every sense open. He could feel the shape of the moment before it arrived. The back door latch lifted once and fell. Someone tested the wood with a gloved hand. A whisper cut the dark, then the scrape of a boot sole against grit. The woman slipped the silver band into her pocket and looked at the warrior, gave a single nod, the kind that had saved them once. No promise spoken. No vow written. Only breath shared in a room where the night held its own counsel. The latch lifted again, and held. The wood began to give. Somewhere across town, the sheriff's step quickened. Somewhere beyond the ridge, a wagon creaked toward the pass. Somewhere in the canyon, a small fire burned low. At the inn's back door, a choice neither of them wanted, arrived like a guest without a name, pushing into the narrow room and bringing with it the cold air of everything they had tried to keep outside. The door gave way with a sharp crack, splinters flying like sparks. Lantern light spilled into the narrow room, cutting across the dust and catching the edge of the warrior's blade. He didn't move, yet he stood silent, the kind of stillness that belongs to predators before a leap. The woman's breath hitched, her fingers tightening on the wooden table beside her. 3 men stepped inside, boots wet from rain, eyes sharp with the confidence of the armed and the ignorant. The one in front, one of the ranch hands bought by the gamblers, silver smelled of whiskey and fear hidden behind bravado. "Step away from the woman," he said. His voice shook just enough to betray the lie of courage. "We're taking you in. The fort wants you alive, but I don't mind if it's the other way." The warrior said nothing. His gaze drifted past them, toward the open street beyond the door, where distant thunder rolled like something waiting its turn. The woman took a step forward before she realized what she was doing. "He's done nothing wrong," she said. "You've no right." "Lady," the man cut her off, "we've got the paper from the fort in gold waiting for proof. Stay out of this or you'll share his fate." The warrior's hand moved slow, deliberate. He laid the blade on the table, not as surrender, but as statement. "You came for gold," he said quietly, "not for justice." One of the others laughed, a nervous sound. "Justice don't feed children." The air felt brittle, stretched to breaking. The woman could feel her pulse in her throat, her palms slick. She knew how close death was. The room too small, the men too tense, the warrior too calm. The gambler's plan was working. Chaos was exactly what he wanted. Before anything could snap, a voice called from outside. Enough. It was the sheriff. Rain clung to his hat, his badge dull in the lamplight. He stood in the doorway with his hand near his holster but not on it. "No one draws," he said. "You boys want to hand over a man? You do it legal? Break into homes? I'll hang you before the army even asks why." The ranch hands hesitated. One lowered his rifle, the other cursed under his breath. The leader looked torn between pride and fear, but the sheriff's stare won. They stepped back into the night, their boots splashing through puddles. The sheriff turned his gaze on the warrior, steady but heavy. "You're running out of borrowed time," he said. "By morning, the soldiers will be here." "I can't stop them all." The woman spoke before the warrior could. "He's not running," she said. "He's staying because the truth matters." The sheriff looked at her weary. "Truth matters less than timing, miss. And time's near gone." Then he left, shutting the door behind him. The silence that followed was worse than noise. The warrior looked at her, and for the first time there was something fragile in his expression. "They won't stop," he said. "No," she answered, her voice breaking. "But neither will you." That night, neither of them slept. He sharpened his knife by the window, while she packed what little she owned. Outside, the wind rose and carried the smell of rain-soaked earth and smoke from distant fires. Somewhere in the canyon, his people waited. Somewhere on the road, the soldiers marched. Between those two worlds they stood, caught by a lie that had become something deeper than either intended. By dawn, the first riders from the fort appeared on the ridge. Dusk curled behind them like ghosts. The town stirred uneasy. Children were called inside, windows shut, prayers whispered under breath. The gambler stood by the saloon, watching with satisfaction as the soldiers approached. He'd sent word the night before, pointing them toward the inn, and now he waited for payment in gold or vengeance. The sheriff met the soldiers halfway. The officer in charge, a clean-cut man with sharp eyes, showed him the wanted notice. "We have orders to take him," he said. "The Apache called by this name matches the description. He's accused of killing settlers near the northern ridge. That drawing could be any man with dark hair and scars," the sheriff replied. "You're about to burn peace for mistake." "Peace," the officer said dryly. "There's been no peace here for years." While they argued, the woman and the warrior stood at the window, watching the line of soldiers move closer. She turned to him. "If you stay, they'll take you. If you run, they'll hunt you." He fastened the leather strap across his shoulder. "Then I'll meet them where the ground remembers me. You can't face them alone," she said, her voice rising. "This isn't your fight anymore." He looked at her then, really looked, as if seeing her through the smoke of all the things that had burned between them. "It became my fight the moment you stood beside me and called me husband," he said softly. "That lie made me live. Now truth will decide if I deserve it." She wanted to beg him to stay, to choose safety, to let the world's cruelty pass by them like a storm. But she saw the resolve in his eyes, the same fire that had kept him alive when everything else had fallen away. And in that moment, she knew that nothing she said would change the path that had already begun. Outside, the soldiers dismounted. The gambler led them toward the inn, pretending ignorance while feeding their anger with every gesture. "That's him," he said. "Been hiding here with the woman." Sheriff knew it and turned blind. The officer ordered his men forward. The sheriff stepped in their way. "This ends without blood," he said. "You'll take him alive or not at all." The officer gave a cold smile. "If he comes peacefully, perhaps." Inside, the woman helped the warrior gather what little they could. She placed the carved bird in his hand. "For luck," she whispered. He shook his head. "For truth." Then he kissed her forehead, a brief touch filled with everything unspoken. The knock came like thunder. "Open up," the sheriff's voice followed, urgent. "Don't fight them." But the warrior was already moving. He stepped into the street, rain beating on his skin, eyes calm as the soldiers raised their rifles. The townsfolk watched from behind shutters, breath held. The gambler smirked in the background, waiting for the moment he could turn victory into coin. The officer barked, "Drop your weapon." The warrior held out his empty hands. "You want a name?" he said, "but the one on your paper is dead. The man who stands here is only truth." The soldiers hesitated, and the sheriff moved closer, ready to intervene. But the gambler shouted from behind the crowd, "He's lying. He killed the rancher's boy near the ridge." A murmur ran through the crowd. The officer stiffened, hand on his revolver. "Is that true?" The warrior didn't flinch. "I killed men who came with fire in their hands. I spared the boy. Carried a songbird feather. Tell him to show it if he lives." The officer's jaw tightened. "You expect me to believe a savage's tale?" The sheriff's patience snapped. "Believe what you want, but if you spill blood here, it won't wash off easy." The gambler stepped forward, his voice loud, taunting. "Let's see who bleeds first." He reached for his gun, but the shot that followed didn't come from him. It came from one of the frightened soldiers, finger trembling, eyes wide. The bullet struck the dust at the warrior's feet, and in that single crack, order shattered. Horses reared, men shouted, rifles lifted in panic. The air turned to chaos. The woman ran from the doorway, shouting his name, but the storm of sound drowned her voice. The sheriff tried to pull the officer back, yelling commands no one heard. The gambler vanished into the smoke. The warrior moved through the confusion like shadow and flame. He didn't draw his blade until he had to, until another soldier lunged too close. The clash was quick and terrible, and then he was gone into the maze of rain and shouting. The woman chased after him, the world spinning in blur. Torches flickered, boots thundered, and the town seemed to tilt between fire and darkness. She reached the edge of the field where the earth turned to open plain. Through the smoke and rain, she saw him running toward the ridge, soldiers following. "Stop!" She cried, "Please, stop!" But her voice was lost in the storm. Behind her, the sheriff mounted his horse, shouting for the soldiers to hold fire. The officer ignored him. "After him," he ordered. "He'll lead us to the others." Lightning split the sky, and for a heartbeat the land lit like day. She saw him turn once, looking back at her, and even across the distance, she could see what that look meant. It wasn't fear. It wasn't regret. It was goodbye, silent and final as the desert wind. She ran after him anyway, bare feet sinking into the wet ground, the silver band clutched in her hand. The sound of hooves grew louder behind her, the ring of metal on stone closing in. The storm raged, and the line between truth and lie, love and survival blurred until there was nothing left but the heartbeat of two souls caught in the same wild fate. Racing toward the ridge where everything would endure begin, rain soaked the earth and turned the plains to rivers of mud. The storm had swallowed the sound of gunfire, leaving only thunder and breathless silence. She ran until her dress clung to her legs, until her lungs burned, until the ridge loomed above her like the edge of the world. The soldiers' torches flickered below, still chasing, still shouting through the storm. Somewhere in that darkness was the man she had lied for, the man she had come to love. The Apache warrior was fighting not for freedom now, but for truth, the kind that couldn't be buried in dust or drowned in rain. She reached the ridge and stumbled over the wet stones, her hand clutching the silver ring that had come to mean more than its weight. Lightning lit the land for a moment, and there he was, standing alone near the canyon's edge, the wind tearing at his hair, his figure carved against the storm. Behind him, soldiers climbed fast, their rifles glinting. Ahead, the drop fell deep into shadows where the canyon roared with unseen water. He turned when he heard her voice, his eyes fierce, his chest rising with every breath like a man who already knew the price of what was coming. "You shouldn't have followed me," he said, his voice carried away by the wind. "I won't let them take you," she shouted back. "It's already done," he answered. "They'll never let a man like me live free." Her tears mixed with the rain. "Then let me stand with you like before, if this is how it ends." Something broke in his expression, a softness that flashed and faded. "You've already done more than I ever dreamed anyone would. Go back, live." But she didn't move. The sound of hooves drew closer, the soldiers spreading out around the ridge. The officer barked orders through the storm, his voice sharp with the hunger of victory. "Surrender or we'll shoot." The warrior didn't answer. His hand brushed the feather that hung from his neck, a reminder of family waiting in the Red Canyon, of promises made long before this night. Then he looked at her, the woman who had crossed a line no one dared to cross, and said quietly, "Truth brought us here. Let it finish what it started." She reached for his hand, her fingers trembling. "And tell me one truth before you go." He looked at her, and for a moment the world stilled. "That I never meant for it to be a lie." The soldiers fired a warning shot, the echo rolling across the hills. The sheriff arrived moments later, his horse slick with rain. "Hold your fire," he shouted. Panic had already taken the men. One of them slipped on the wet rocks. Another raised his rifle in fear, and the officer's command turned to chaos. A shot cracked the night, then another. The woman screamed. The warrior stumbled back, a red bloom spreading across his side. He caught himself on one knee, eyes still locked on hers. She ran to him as the sheriff threw himself between them and the soldiers, shouting for order that no one could hear. When she reached him, he was still breathing, barely. "You see," he whispered, "truth always costs something." She pressed her hand against the wound, the rain washing her tears into the blood. "No," she said, shaking her head. "You're not dying, not like this." He tried to smile, but it came weak. "Maybe not dying. Just becoming what I was meant to be." His hand lifted, shaking, to the small carved bird she still carried. "Finish it," he said. "Give it wings." The sheriff knelt beside them, rage and sorrow tangled on his face. "The fool who fired will hang," he muttered, but his voice broke halfway. "There's no undoing this." The soldiers lowered their guns. Even the officer's face looked pale under the lightning. The woman clung to the warrior as the rain fell harder, his breath slowing. "Tell them," he said softly. "Tell them I wasn't what they thought. Tell them I lived by a lie that became love." "I will," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I promise." He nodded once, his eyes dimming. Then it wasn't a lie after all. His hand fell limp in hers. When the storm finally passed, the land lay quiet. The sheriff made sure the soldier who fired never raised a weapon again. The gambler who had started it all tried to slip away, but the town caught him before sunrise. By the next day, his saloon was empty, and his name vanished like smoke. The soldiers left, their pride buried under the guilt of what they had done. The officer, gave her a folded note before he rode. Out it carried a seal from the fort and a single sentence: "For bravery beyond borders, this town shall not be punished." She buried the warrior near the ridge where the wind never stopped. The preacher's sister came to help, silent but steady, and placed a small wooden cross at the head of the grave. The woman set the carved bird there too, its wings finally finished, smooth and open toward the sky. She wore the silver ring that day, not as a lie, but as truth written in memory. Weeks passed, the rain gave way to summer heat. The town returned to its quiet rhythm, but something had changed. Men spoke softer when they passed her in the street. Children played near the well and asked about the brave man who had stood against the army. The sheriff stopped wearing his badge for a time, saying the law had to learn mercy again before it could wear steel. The preacher's sister started a small school by the church, where she told the children that lies built from love sometimes grow into truths worth keeping. One morning, the woman took her horse and rode out to the canyon. The path was narrow, carved through rock and memory. When she reached the camp, she found the people he had spoken to the boy with the broken bow. The woman grinding corn, the old man who had warned of truth's blade. They watched her approach, wary but not hostile. She dismounted slowly and held out the feather that had once hung around his neck. "I came to tell you," she said, her voice low but firm, "that he kept his promise. He brought you peace, even if it cost his own." The old man took the feather, eyes glistening, murmured, "Now I see he sent it instead." They offered her water and a place to rest, but she stayed only until dusk. When she left, the boy followed her to the ridge. "Did he love you?" he asked quietly. She looked out over the land, the hills, the fields, the lonely and far in the distant sand, smiled sadly. "Enough to make me brave," she said. Years went by. The town grew around the well where he had once stood, and travelers came through, hearing whispers of an Apache who saved a woman by pretending she was his wife. Some said it was legend, others swore it was true. But those who looked closely would see a small grave on the ridge, carved bird watching over it, wings open, as if still in flight. The woman lived long enough to see peace reach the land at last. Children learned both languages in the school by the church. The sheriff grew gray, but never forgot that night. The gambler's saloon was rebuilt into a trading post that carried goods between settlers and tribes. And every year, when the rain returned, someone would leave a fresh feather by the grave. No one knew who started the tradition, only that it continued long after all who remembered were gone. In her final days, she kept a journal, writing not of war or fear, but of love that began with a lie and ended in truth. Her last words were simple. "He asked me to pretend. I never stopped. I only learned that pretending to love can become love itself, if the heart dares enough." When she passed, the townsfolk buried her beside him, under the same endless sky. The wind carried through the grass like an old whisper, gentle and unbroken. The story of the Apache warrior and the woman who became his wife lived on not as tragedy, but as a reminder. In a world built on walls, they had found each other across them. In a time when lies could save lives, they had turned one into love. And though the desert would forget their names, the land would remember the truth they left behind, one born from courage, bound by promise and carried forever by the wind.